let me introduce myself. My name is Joseph Shahadi. I'm the executive director of the Art of Brooklyn Film Festival. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our 15th annual AOBFF. Every year we do what we think are some really exciting, substantive, the key word for tonight, panel programming. And when it came time to put this together for that part of the program together for this year, I had a conversation with Daniel, who I'm going to introduce in a moment, who is our guest festival director for documentary for this year. And we were talking really about what it even means to be making documentary in a moment when truth is itself so contested. So, that I feel like artists ask that question sort of regularly, like, what is truth? And it becomes kind of very theoretical. But I don't think we're in that moment where it's theoretical. I think literally people disagree about what's true in the most basic way about almost everything. And that is one of the things that characterizes what we're living through right now. Whoever you are, wherever you live, whatever your positioning is. And so the question, how do you make documentary, if documentarians are the people that we depend on to make work about what's true, how do you do that now? And so that was really the seed of this conversation. So we're calling this conversation the Cinema of Truthiness, after George W. Bush's famous misspeak about what's true, which really, I think you can draw a direct line between then and now. So what I'd like to do first, just quickly, is in a very abbreviated way, introduce you to our panelists, and then talk about kind of what it is we are proposing to talk about. So I mentioned Daniel, Daniel FEIGHERY, who is an award-winning director and cinematographer in both documentary and scripted filmmaking, so has a really interesting perspective on this conversation. He is our 2025 guest festival director for documentary film, and he has worked on everything from Oscar award-winning movies to US presidential campaigns to Sundance documentaries, Clio awarded commercials, and MTV VMA award-winning music videos. He has won awards for his own work in documentary, including at our festival, and he teaches filmmaking and cinematography at New York Film Academy. I met Daniel at our festival when he won an award for making documentary. He was the natural choice, we thought, for a short list for guest festival director for this year. It's been a real pleasure working with you on this, Daniel. Daniel introduced me to Emily, who I'm meeting officially for the first time right now, so this is very exciting. Emily is a documentary filmmaker originally from Orangeburg, South Carolina. Her films have screened at festivals all over, including at Tribeca and Doc NYC and Telluride. She is an extremely diverse and storied figure in this world. So I'm extremely happy that she's here participating with us. One of the things I want to pick out here is that she's part of Doc NYC's 2021 40 Under 40 class and is the 2023 recipient of River Run International Film Festival Spark Award. A member of Film Fatales, an organization that we're quite familiar with here at AOBFF, Documentary Producers Alliance, and the Collective Film Shop, also old friends of ours. A graduate of New York University's Tisch School of the Arts and has a master's in film and media studies from Columbia. Big shout out to Tisch, where I used to work and study. And finally, that brings us to Ash Marinaccio, who is a multidisciplinary documentarian working in visual storytelling, nonfiction performance, and journalism. She is the founding artist and artistic director of DocBlock, which is a company that brings artists together for collaborations across documentary forms. So her work investigates multiple intersecting identities and expanding historical archives in film, photography, and theater. She's presented her work across the United States and internationally. Her photography has appeared in Time Out New York, Daily News, The Advocate, Independent, Performance Research, and other publications. She's received fellowships from the Mellon Foundation, NY Public Humanities, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and is a two-time TED speaker and Ash holds a PhD in theater from the CUNY Graduate Center. Very happy to be on the advisory board of Doc Block, which is a really exciting organization. So hello to all of you guys, and dragging your giant CVs behind you to have this conversation with us. So, you know, uh, when we first started talking about this, you know, I just had questions like, what does it mean to make documentaries right now? And then when I really started to pull at that, I started to ask, like, what does documentary even really mean when reality has become a fiction genre with reality television? What does it mean to be a documentary filmmaker when everyone has a camera on their phone and news is captured and reported by citizen reporters as it happens? What role do documentaries play as audiences for giant action tentpoles are shrinking, but true crime as a genre is exploding in popularity? Um, so the overarching question is, are documentaries more or less relevant now? And so that's really where I want to start. Um, so I've been talking a lot. Why don't we start with you, Daniel, as our 2025 guest festival director for documentary? You had to watch a lot of docs that were submitted to us, and so you should have a very up to the minute sense of what people are making documentaries about and how they're working. Do you want to speak to that just a bit to start us off?
Sure. I guess, yeah, it also, going on a festival run over the last year with Birdfeeder has also given me a lot of insight into, where we are at the moment right now. Yeah, it's interesting that, like, truthiness, and the way that the medium presents itself. There's a big difference between what you're seeing at film festivals and what you're seeing streaming. And the streaming world is so predicated on just subs, and it just really feels like, tech bros that have optimized their audience
Mm.
in a way that's totally different from what documentaries are really trying to do, both for, like, a cause, some sort of impact, and how we interact with our audience. So, part of what I think the conversation has to address is, like, you know, streaming and how it's affecting documentaries in a way that's both good and bad, in like, the way that we have a newfound audience in so many different ways, but also the fight that almost we have to make to capture an audience for something that's worthwhile versus, like, a Bravo, TLC, cable genre, just the lowest common denominator of reality television, which doesn't really give you insights into the human condition, catharsis through, some sort of identification with someone else in a story. Um, they it's almost like two different mediums, almost. When you talk about something like The Last Dance on an ESPN documentary versus Blackfish, or a movie that I worked on, The Hunting Ground, about sexual assault on college campuses, where there's an exploitation almost of reality in that lower, what I would call a lower form of quote unquote documentary, versus trying to either inform viewers, or gain some sort of emotional connection with them, which, um, is different than that sort of, like, tabloid reality documentary form. Do you guys want to speak to that at all?
So what I'm hearing you saying is that the two things you're picking out are the platform that people, the delivery system, how we're getting documentary through streaming, and then also maybe the filmmaker's attitude toward the subject. And you use the word exploitation or exploitative, which is extremely provocative.
Sure, because I've
Sure.
gotten calls to work on Real Housewives,
Sure.
like an actual episode of Real Housewives, which that can, like, that's reality, that's documentary in some people's eyes, and is, like, I know that it's exploitative of both, like, the subjects, the crews, and almost you could say of the audience.
Hmm. Emily, you were nodding along as Daniel was making those points. You agree with what he's saying?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I think we are seeing, there was talk maybe when streaming was first getting going, maybe 10 years ago, that we are in the golden age of documentary, and that's kind of been the mantra for the last 10 years. And I think in the last year and a half in particular, that has kind of shifted and turned on its head. And especially as a maker, I think we are all starting to see these unintended consequences of these larger distribution platforms. And I think Daniel makes a good point in that the documentary form is definitely more recognized as a type of medium. There's a bigger audience, but the kinds of documentaries that traditionally were called documentaries are on the streamers, not the, like he said, they're not always about like the human condition and stepping into another person's shoes. They're becoming much more a form of entertainment and in many ways clickbait. And so that blending of reality and documentary is definitely something that we're seeing happening. And to your point about the truthfulness of it, I will say, I mean, documentary at its beginning was never the truth. I mean, we are immediately changing the situation by even filming it. Some of the very first documentaries were completely staged. But I think there was, and for many filmmakers, this goal of like finding a deeper truth about the human condition and about shared experience. And I think with more of these entertainment documentaries, that isn't part of the calculus of the filmmaking. And so it becomes much more about the entertainment value, and that's really it. And the problem is when you call it a documentary and there's this expectation in the world that it's truth, that then those lines get blurred. And with technology heading in the direction it is, it's so easy to mislead and make people think what they're watching is, the unedited objective truth, when A, that never existed to begin with, and B, we're not now, as entertainment documentaries, even trying to address that as a real issue in the form.
Ash, I wonder if you could pull a historical thread out of this point. I'm really glad that you brought this up, Emily, about, were documentaries ever the truth, right? That we change things by observing them. I know that your graduate research on nonfiction forums touched on anthropology, and we know about the kind of colonial history of anthropology and the way that it exploited its subjects, which is maybe an interesting parallel to what Daniel was saying about the moment that we're in right now. So I wonder if you could speak to that from
Yeah.
the start.
Yeah, I mean, I work in, you said this, I work primarily in nonfiction theater and photography. So it's fascinating to hear the conversations about streaming platforms and some of the, distribution pertaining specifically to film. Um, when I think about documentary and like nonfiction forms, I often think about facts versus truth, right? So you can have multiple truths. Everybody has a truth. Everybody who is watching this is experiencing this experiencing this vastly different, and that's predicated on your like social conditioning. So how you were brought up, where you're sitting, are you watching it at home, are you watching it outside, are you watching it on a phone, so there's multiple truths, and that's something that I often that gets explored a lot in my work. I think facts, when we talk about facts and alternative facts, that's where it gets problematic because facts are science-based. So, right, so there's no the earth is not flat, right? The earth is round. There's gravity. There's these are facts that are based in science. And I think when we've gotten to a point now with a lot of social media and the various thinking of like TikTok and YouTube and where people are throwing out alternative facts or trying to manipulate facts, and that's I think that's where it becomes dangerous and problematic.
Well, I think if kind of the last thing in the world I even have the energy for right now is to have a political conversation, but it's sort of inevitable, right? Like there
Yeah,
isn't really an
I
escape.
mean,
And
but
so I think if we work backwards from Trump's fake news to George W. Bush's truthiness to Oliver North's A Higher Truth, that a conservative, a consistent conservative talking point for a very long time now has been contesting facts at their base, right? And so we've seen that play out in a large scale around things like whether the earth is round or not. It's easy to make fun of the flat earthers. There's a lot of those people, right? There's a lot of stuff that dovetails, and it's coming more to the fore now because of RFK, around sort of health conspiracy, around things like fluoride in the water. Certainly we've seen that around vaccination. The height of the COVID crisis, which is not over, to now, but obviously before that, for a very long time, people continually bringing up the thoroughly disproven link between vaccinations and autism. So, I hear what you're saying about the difference between facts and truth. That seems really important. And I wonder how that fits with this point that Emily, you were making off of what Dan said about almost as if the thing that sort of separates the new stream of documentary or truth-based media has something to do with empathy, right? That, Daniel, it seems like you were saying that documentary ought to incite empathy in the viewer for the subject, for the dynamic, for the situation, and that, in your view, that is not the goal of let's say, the popular documentary forms, reality, etc., and these sort of reports and things that fill streaming services that are clickbaity. Am I paraphrasing?
Yeah, I mean,
Like
it's almost like a moral integrity. And in a strange way, I think that there's something that goes back thousands of years with this argument. Like when I was thinking about it, like that this is really, when you think about the way that we're now dealing with truth in society, without the gatekeeper of the government, which did away with their truth standards in journalism and broadcast television, and the gatekeeping that existed, and when there was no social media or a way for a universal way for people to talk to each other outside of those gatekeepers, we're now back to the philosophical arguments that Socrates was making against the sophists, where there's so many of his writings are just going at the sophists for their relativistic interpretation of the truth and a lack of pursuit of wisdom and for its own sake, for wisdom for the benefit of society, and also like a universal truth for the benefit of society at the same time. It echoes what he was talking about for thousands of years ago that has now come to the forefront again without the guardrails of a limited broadcast ability beyond what was for, 70 years in America, like PBS, NBC, CBS, and film festivals or limited documentary runs. So now that we have this battle for the truth, which is spread out across society, it almost to me, it seems like we have to go back to those old arguments when truth and lies were both replicating at the same rate through society by word of mouth in the Greek world, and now we're back there again. When everyone can have a voice of a similar magnitude, and lies replicate faster than truth does on social media, and even in the regular press as well.
No, you ask for historical context and they will kick it all the way back to the Greeks, ladies. So I think that's fascinating. I think that that's absolutely fascinating, to play devil's advocate about, let's say, the democratization of the impulse to record, to make documentary, right? One of the things that we have observed, by we, I mean, from the point of view of running an international film festival, right? One of the things that we've observed about the rise of streaming is that it has created pathways for people to make film and television that were previously extremely difficult. I'm thinking about women directors. I'm thinking about directors of color who are able to work now, or certainly on higher profile projects, and certainly more often than they did before, say, streaming platforms existed. I'm talking about Inscripted. Do we think that that is also true of documentary? That, I mean, I know that it's almost a cliche now. It became a cliche very quickly about women and true crime, right? Women making true crime, women consuming true crime, that it has become a genre really associated with women, even though it's a genre that has existed for a really long time, right? And I feel like that's partly because of streaming. So is there a way that we can, what am I asking? Is there a way that we can retain the things that we like about the democratization that comes along with streaming platforms, say, without letting it degrade the medium to the point where it's about making fun of the subjects, hate watching, as opposed to exciting empathy? Even if the people participating in, allowing themselves to be hated are sort of in on it, like my perception of the Real Housewives. I don't watch, so it's from an outside view. Correct me, please, if I'm wrong, but that they're sort of in on the joke of themselves, and that they are participating in this process. So, I mean, we can talk about whether or not they're being degraded, or whether they're participating in entertainment in a way that is about their agency, and that they aren't bothered by things that maybe you would find degrading. I don't, we can talk about that, but that actually, maybe that's not a separate conversation from what I'm saying. Is there a way to retain that leveling that comes from streaming without degrading the form? Is it possible? And if it's not possible, why not? Stumped. Dead air.
I feel like I should let someone else speak about representation first before I say anything.
Potentially say that I don't know if streaming has democratized the form, to be honest. I think maybe there was a moment, documentary makers, that it did. But that moment's over, and it was very short-lived. And the people that are getting streaming deals now are you know, the 0.1% of the 1%, and everyone else is, you know, you're either getting a very bad back end deal or you're not getting it at all, and you're getting pushed out by true crime, sports, or celebrity. And so the films that, you know, were getting the attention or not. And I mean, I think honestly, I think all of that comes back to the fact that documentary became commercial at some point in the last 10 years.
Mm.
And it's become, it used to be a form where you just didn't make money. And so, um, you know, the makers and the distributors were in it for a different reason. They're in it now to make money and to get eyeballs. And that's it.
Mm. Can you place for us historically around when you think that golden moment was, however brief?
Um, I mean, I would say the like 2015 until right like maybe the first year of the pandemic. I would say the pandemic actually was like 2020, 2021 was a huge shift for streaming because so many of us were home and had nothing to do. That's when Tigerland premiered. And you know, that is I would say when these streaming shifts really started to take off, and the kinds of stories that were being made really started to take off.
I would point to the Jinx.
Mm.
Uh,
I would consider that good. Like that was a really well-made documentary series.
sure, but it was one true crime,
Hmm.
two for eyeballs, like they had billboards in Times Square.
Mm.
Right, which to me, I was excited about that because I thought it was well made. I thought it really spoke to the human condition. You're right, it's checking the true crime box, and that's where I think documentary in the form that we appreciate it as is still thriving, but those projects are far and few between. So like Gone Girls that just came out, it's on Netflix. It's true crime about the Jones Beach, the Gilgo Beach serial killer. Very well made.
Yeah,
I,
I got to call to work on that, by
oh, awesome.
the way.
I'm sure it got tons of, you know, like I'm sure it got tons of eyeballs. But for, you know, the one of those that's very well made, very thoughtful, I don't know, there are probably 200 that are not.
So
Uh,
this is the punk rock question, right? Is it possible to do what we do and be successful without having success ruin what we do? Is there a size that you can get? Can you level up in terms of attention? And where's the cutoff before it begins to dilute the the thing that you do? And I think that that's an old question. It's interesting that you talk about the pandemic because one of my um, touch points for lockdown were two documentaries. It was Tigerland and My Octopus Teacher, right? Everyone was watching those. I didn't watch either of them, to be completely honest. I didn't watch either of them, but they were the appointment TV. That was what everyone was watching, and so that's sort of what I meant about the democratization. Like, um, a filmmaker told me years ago that the way that documentary worked was that like 99% of it was sort of down here, and then every year there was one film. So he said you can go back almost by year and pick out the film, whether it was Hoop Dreams or Supersize Me or whatever, that was the film that represented documentary in the popular consciousness for that year. And it seemed to me like during the pandemic, through streaming, suddenly that refracted, and you had a lot of different things. And it seems like it has gotten more and more, like, replicated itself more and more, sort of tinier and tinier as it has gone along. So I don't know if that still works.
I think there's a difference between democratization of production of film and democratization of audience. Getting a streaming deal as a filmmaker. There's a very big difference between people watching your films and being able to make them in the first place. And the promise with digital, which you know, with the Canon 5D in 2008 or whatever it was, the red camera, and all of these digital cameras that have taken it outside of, you know, 35 millimeter, 16 millimeter, 8 millimeter film, which was such a barrier to entry for such a long time. The promise has always been that everyone can make their movie, but the promise was never fulfilled in a way that everyone will see your movie, or that it's that you can not get lost in the noise of so much crap being out there either.
And I will say this year, I think we turned a corner in that I think the majority of the Oscar nominated documentaries did not have distribution.
Yeah.
You could only see them in short runs at select theaters in select cities, you know, and that used to be how it was. But, you know, again, to your point about democratization, we've had a decade or so where they were streaming on Netflix or Hulu or, but I think this year spoke to the fact that those kinds of films are not the films that are getting the streaming deals.
Right. Ash, I know this because you and I are friends and I know your work. I know that you made a documentary series yourself. And so, I hear you when you say that your current work is very focused around photojournalism, blurring the lines between photojournalism and fine art, which is the thing I want to talk with you about, because I think it speaks to that empathy for the subject question that Daniel brought up. But I think that you're sort of uniquely positioned to speak about this because you made a documentary series. And so I remember when you were working on that, can you talk about the what's next part of that for you? Like, had you considered where to put that and how it would live in the world? Who would see it?
It was very niche. So I've worked on a few documentary series. I did one, and they were both very niche. One was they were great, but they had two very different audiences. One was the most recent one I did was on food. Uh, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on it. It was a oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking on it. It was a food documentary, and it was funded by PBS in Taiwan. So it was about Taiwanese food in New York, and they were short, like there were short episodics, and it had a funder. So we were commissioned to do that, and we sent the episodes back, and they edited it and brought it. It played on the public broadcasting in Taiwan, and I saw a few of the episodes. I don't speak Taiwanese, so I did not see. I think it came out really well, but it was a very niche audience. With Stage Left, which was the documentary series that you're talking about, that was about theater it's about theater, like social justice theater, which was my PhD area. And again, like very niche, actually too niche for even, because they have like on stage, you have some of those documentary series about theater, but generally when I went around looking for potential distributors, it was recommended to put it online or put it on YouTube and put it online because it's extremely niche, even for theater, even for CUNY. Actually, CUNY TV was interested, but yeah, I think when you go down those kind of niche rabbit holes, you even have to find. I mean, I found myself like there is kind of, you have to find a mass appeal even in that, which is hard, because a lot of the artists I was working with were very much against that, very much didn't want to be part of the mainstream. So you're working with folks who don't want to be in the mainstream, but wanting to put their stories out there. It was it was fascinating. It was interesting. They were both pretty fascinating projects.
Again, the punk rock question, right? How do we do and get eyes on it without ruining it? So I will actually ask this question to all three of you. When you are working, at what point, if at any point during the process of making specifically a doc project, are you thinking about what, like the what next, the where will this go? Do you consider that at any point during the process, or is that something that comes in at the end once you see what you've made?
I absolutely consider that. I think about documentary. I do documentary theater, and it is long form, and it's a lot of time. I do. I'll interview. There's a piece I'm working on now that I did about 80 interviews at 2 hours each, and I translate everything myself because of the sensitive nature of the material. So it's time consuming, it's labor intensive. There's often not a lot of resources to do it. So immediately from the beginning, I'm thinking about who will see this, who's the audience for this, because that's gonna, if you want the work to be seen, you have to think about your audience. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You want to think about like who are the right people for this, because not everything is for everyone. And I think that's okay. That's, not everything is going to be, documentary theater generally doesn't go to Broadway. It's not commercial. So you're thinking about like, where is this going to live? And, there are spaces and there are homes for different pieces, but, again, not everything is for everybody. And yes, I'm always thinking about that.
So you think of that as a creative question then, where
Oh, absolutely.
part of the the artistic process for you is.
Yeah.
Interesting. Daniel, you started to speak.
Well, I think that's just such a relevant question for any filmmaker in a way. How many, like, just even on Instagram, somebody was saying like, if you're making a documentary, think about your audience first, sort of like, in a way, like the social, has made it so people think about that even more. I think like people think about that for their TikTok channel, like who's my audience, and so in a way, thinking about your audience from the beginning is more prevalent now than it used to be. When we were starting to make, like, I fumbled around with a documentary and didn't know who my audience was going to be, and it turned out to be a disaster. Like, very, earlier in my career, and I ignored the advice of always thinking about like, who is this going to serve? Where is this going to go through? And it's since there's been the crash in documentary, the bubble burst, everybody's struggling with this so much more at the higher levels, in addition to just lower levels. Like, it doesn't matter like how big you are, if you aren't signing that deal with someone to get it somewhere, then where is it going to go? Like, it's a question that everybody asks now. And it's the number one piece of advice for anyone who's starting out, who's a student, who's younger, who's emerging in, who's really interested in documentaries. Like, that's always the thing that we try and talk about, to, like, even when I teach at New York Film Academy, I'm talking about that with my students as well. Like, where is this going to go? How do you build an audience? Who's interested in it? It's, in a way, it becomes almost like a battle for yourself. Like, is this okay if I'm the only one interested in it? Or can I make a film that's only designed to be made for like an audience of a handful of people? Like, is there anything that like a bigger audience can take from that if it's made in like an intimate way? So sometimes that can happen as well.
Sorry, the creative question for you then starts with, who is this for? And then that leads you to, where will it go? So the question isn't necessarily about the platform. The question is about the audience, and then
well, it's a blending. I mean, I think it's a blend of like, sometimes the film tells you what it wants to be about, but it's also like, does anyone care about this? It's just not just masturbation of like me making a film for something myself that I just care about. Like, how do I engage with an audience? I mean, that was like when I was studying film in college, I applied to be in my like the advanced film class, and I got into an argument with the head of the department. Emily, you know, Jill Godmillo was my professor there, who was, you know, nominated for an Oscar. And to get into the film class, I showed her some paintings, and she's like, "Well, have you showed this in a gallery? Have you like showed your paintings to an audience?" And I was like, "No, I'm too embarrassed or I'm too shy." And she was like, "Well, you can't make art without the audience."
Mm.
I was like, "Well, what about Emily Dickinson, you know, and her poems that she wrote in her attic for 40 years by herself that, you know, only found an audience after she was dead?" And she's like, "Emily Dickinson, throw that out. Like you're making you're like, that's an outlier. Like you're trying to have an engagement with your audience and an interaction with your audience. Do you want to be provocative? Like you have to provoke and then see what your audience is provoked by and then have that feedback loop come back to inform your filmmaking. You can't make art in a vacuum."
Does this resonate with you, Emily?
Well, I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit because I do actually think the Emily Dickinson argument is a good one. And, uh, you know, I think we're all different kinds of filmmakers and we decide that ourselves, and it shifts and changes and transforms as we continue to make work. Um, but there are definitely filmmakers that make films for themselves, and the audience is not first and foremost. I think personally, for me, it's a part of the thing I think about, but I think also because I have a foot in the commissioned documentary space and then a foot in the indie space, um, you know, that audience question is different for the kind of film that I'm making at the moment. Um, you know, if it's a commissioned work, you literally have an audience, you know? And so you're being hired to make work for that audience. When you're making an indie film, you often don't have the luxury of knowing where it's going to go. And B, usually it's something you're really personally passionate about. So you also as an audience member, also as someone that's trying to impart your version of truth to someone, you're going to make the film that you want to make. I will say the audience question with, again, these more popular documentaries, I think is almost reigning too supreme. Um, you know, I've heard, and this is definitely like, you know, hearing from other makers, but that a lot of these decisions about how the films are made, what's getting greenlit, is coming down to analytics. And the idea, there's been, you know, a lot of studies over like the last year or a few years or so about the addiction of social media. And I think we're seeing that translate a little bit into the long form. And so a lot of the stuff is like, they're editing things in that manner of like knowing the dopamine kicks
Mm.
so that we will keep watching.
Mm.
And that kind of audience telling you and thinking about your audience as you make the film, I don't necessarily think serves the form.
Mm.
To
Truth.
respond to Emily, I'm not talking about pandering to an audience for that purpose.
Mm.
I still think you're making when I'm talking about making films for an audience, I don't think it's like that lowest common denominator of what's a dopamine click. Like I still think there's a difference between that and like the catharsis that you feel when you go through watching.
They're definitely gradations. Like I am not, and I will say this, I am not a filmmaker that is making films just for myself. Like I want people to see my work. But I think the extremes are that, like the people that literally do not care and they're going to make the film they want to make. And it might be a 15-hour opus that literally no one else can sit through.
Right.
And these dopamine kick, social media inspired, like audience is supreme, and we don't really care about the storytelling or the truth
Yeah,
or the
focus group
ethic.
filmmaking.
Yeah.
Is
And then
there
in
is there
between, where like the mostly like thoughtful filmmakers that we all are somewhere, you know.
Sure. And the idea of like documentaries being made for focus groups is just so abhorrent to me in terms of like such a twisting of the medium, like in such a bad way. As you're smiling and nodding along.
No, I think I'm yeah, that's horrifying. I think about oh my gosh, and thinking about making things for an audience. I just had I just worked on a like an ensemble created documentary theater project, and right before the final performance, it was like a week before the performance in front of the audience. The show was running like 2.5 hours. And, I had to, as the director, be like, all right, this is a show in a hot studio on a sixth floor walk up with no lights, with, with, not a lot of tech. Nobody wants to sit here for 2.5 hours to watch this. Like, we need to cut, this needs to be cut. And it was it was very, very hard for the actors. It was very hard for the participants, and like having to step in and, make those creative decisions sometimes comes with, it comes with feedback, or feedback, it comes with pushback. Yeah, I mean, I was laughing at that because I was thinking about, oh yeah.
I wanted to ask you, we have been talking about these things as if they're sort of on opposite ends of the spectrum, working for an audience that sort of in the most extreme version, like from a focus group versus people who are working only for themselves. It seems to me like you keep dancing back and forth between these extremes with commissioned projects and then working with these very niche subjects, these niche communities. And so I wondered if maybe part of the reason you were doing the niche, focusing on niche communities, was because you were trying to not just work for yourself, but you were trying to kind of form community with those people, that you were using your documentary attention to sort of coalition build, to reach out, to make connection, even if only between yourself as sort of the first audience and then an audience that you're inviting into the subject. Would you say that that was accurate, like an accurate description of your work?
Yeah, I mean, I do community-based work. So that's what my work is, and that's what I do. Like, I work in in various communities, and it's always going to be something that I care about, otherwise I'm not going to be the right person to do that. And sometimes, even back to thinking about audience and thinking about story, like thinking about the work, like that is a creative decision. Sometimes once you have discussions about, because it always begins, what process always begins with talking about, all right, this is the story we want to tell. How do you want to tell the story? How do you want to be represented in this work? And where people have agency in that and how they're represented. And sometimes, if we're setting out to do a film, we may find out, within that early process that, oh, this isn't a film, this is a podcast, or, oh, this isn't a podcast, this is a theater piece, or, oh, this is a photography piece. So it's, I always am a documentarian, which I think, because our culture, it's very much, when you say that, it's film, but I mean, I work across nonfiction forms, and it's often, what's the medium that the story is going to be told in is driven by the community. So that's very different, I think, than a lot of
like the front end thing that Daniel was saying about finding the audience and then the audience sort of leading to where the story lives. You're on the front end, making community with the people, and then the people in the subject area that you are exploring, and then using that as the jumping off point. That's sort of interesting, actually. I am curious to ask all of you, because we are so saturated now with nonfiction, right? But in this, as you say, very kind of basic way through social media. Daniel, at the launch party, you and I were talking about Ring camera videos, right? That there are entire YouTube channels and Instagram reel after Instagram reel of crazy things that people have caught on their Ring cameras that are all knitted together. My cousin, one year at Thanksgiving, he'd become obsessed with watching these videos about porch pirates, which are the people that steal packages off of
Yeah.
people's front porches in the suburbs. And there's this guy, or maybe it's a group, I don't remember now, uh, that do dummy packages filled with glitter bombs so that they
Yeah, I saw that.
steal the, but also that have little cameras in a drone and the glitter bomb. And so you'll see the ring camera of them stealing it, and then it cuts to them opening it up, like in their truck or their car or back at their apartment, and a drone will fly out and spray glitter everywhere, and you'll see them go ah like that. And they're he must have shown me 60 of these in a row, right? Like it really does. It's the simplest narrative in the world about like immediate karma, like comeuppance. And so I wonder what your version of that is. Is there anything that you indulge in, either on TV or in social media, that is a nonfiction form that is part of this kind of degraded version of the genre, or as documentarians, are you just turned off to the whole idea? No Real Housewives watchers, no Bravo people, no TMC. I have
I mean, I watched The Last Dance. Like, I will say that, you know, and there was a certain, I don't know. I think there was just more of a narrative construction behind it.
The last
Like,
great though.
yeah, and so I'm trying to think about something else that, like, it's almost set up like a Greek tragedy or something like that in terms of the way that the story is told. Like, this is your final go around on this carousel, and your last chance at the circus, and will you perform? Like, uh I'm trying to think of some, like, I don't really try and watch that kind of thing other than, like, you know, baby videos on Instagram now, because you know, having a child, like, there's that kind of thing where, I don't know, there's some educational aspects to that, more so than just and what you're talking about, where, you know, it's a little more indulgent, trashy kind of a thing for myself. So that's all I can say about it.
I get very sucked into the like Instagram and Facebook stories. And a lot of that stuff is arguably documentary content. Um, Especially some of the like influencer people that are like constantly documenting their lives, that you could say is kind of born out of a form of documentary that is then reality, that is now this like vlogging whatever. And those can, I mean, they're very addicting, you know, like, so and it's very easy. It's like right on your phone. You don't have to do anything. It just keeps going forever and ever.
So I mean, I can't believe I'm saying this. So I I watch. There's two things. I'll go back and forth, and it's always late at night. It depends. And this, is it a Minke Whale night or is it Mount Everest night? And it's like people who stream like from climbing Mount Everest. And I'll just watch them over and over again and like watch about, and then this is like, I don't know if it's true crime, but like a lot of people die on Everest and they plan, yeah, like K2 and like all of the mountain climate. Like I'm really into that. And then like whales, Minke whales, like whale documentaries, sometimes wave documentaries. I used to watch Dance Moms.
The Everest one is interesting because IMAX, this is when I was young, but IMAX actually had this like 3D documentary where you like watched them climb Everest, and it was, I think, one of the most popular documentaries, and it was like quite an epic. Um, but I agree, these adventure like
Yeah,
short clips where you see people doing these larger than life things. Um, Again, I think it's the dopamine kick.
it is because I can feel myself specifically with the Everest stuff. because they're at these like extreme altitudes. I can feel the heart palpitations sometimes. It's like, oh, it is that kind of, there is a dopamine kick with
and I don't think the
the
dopamine kick is necessarily the problem. I think the problem is the way that we are getting manipulated with the content. And I think that's one of the things that we're seeing that's, again, with the rise of social media and streaming, that, like, you know, again, trying to connect the storytelling and those experiences to a larger reason that we're watching the film or going on the journey, that's disappeared. And again, it's just the addiction part.
Like, girl, sit down. You're laying in your bed. There's no need to have heart palpitations. You are not on Everest. Like, girl, sit down.
So what I'm hearing you say, Emily, about this is that intentionality is key. So we have talked about empathy for the subject, which is something I want to circle back to with you, Ash, in a moment. But the intentionality of the filmmaker, the person capturing, whether it's another subject or whether they're making themselves the subject, what their intentions are, that is another thing that is separating different kinds of nonfiction content.
Yeah, and I think it's less the filmmaker and more the distribution platforms. We, as the filmmakers, are the makers, but we are not the ones that are building these platforms and figuring out what the algorithms and thinking about what are we going to clip out and how are we going to target this, and this. Usually we as the filmmakers are actually completely taken out of that conversation.
That is really interesting. So that means that what you're putting into it up front on your end then becomes even more important, because at a certain point it's out of your hands. Although it does seem like the people who are content creators, and that's broadly, right? I'm not just talking about whatever the most extreme reality content that we keep using as the reference point, because there is also educational content, as you pointed out, Daniel, and sort of experiential content like the Everest and the whales. I do think it's funny, knowing you, Ash, that it's, for you, it's about Everest or the whales. So you're either all the way up or all the way down.
I'm a girl of extremes.
You're a girl of extremes. Tell me, from the point of view of someone who photographs professionally in the photojournalism space, right? That and you're often in the position of photographing vulnerable people, vulnerable populations, people in extreme circumstances. I wonder if you could talk about what your intentionality is then in capturing those images and representing those people. Like, what are you bringing into that exchange? Because it's extremely intimate, having your photograph taken, but also being the one who takes the photograph. It's it's like this extremely intimate experience. So if you are in a position where you're the one doing that with someone who is vulnerable, you have a lot of responsibility that you're sort of bringing into that. So since you do that professionally, and then I think that informs all of the other documentary forms that you explore, whether it's film and video or performance. Could you talk about that dynamic?
Absolutely. So I take a trauma-based approach to the work. So that means, you kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but before we even start shooting, I'm thinking specifically of a project I did with somebody who I worked with her for a year. And she was going through cancer treatment and wanted her story documented. And it was stage 4, serious cancer. And it was in her face, and she was a burlesque dancer. So the story is about her going through cancer treatment, but also getting her smile back. So when we started working on that, it's called To Smile Again. Even before, I'm sorry.
seriously deformed from the.
Oh yeah, yeah. A 15-hour surgery to remove the cancer. It was really very serious. About 2 years ago, actually 2 years ago. We started in June of 23. So, yeah. So I mean, even before, and this is just my process in general, even before we start shooting or start working together, there's conversations around representation. How do you want, like with this piece specifically, when she went under for a 15-hour surgery and wanted me there to shoot when she woke up. And there were conversations around consent, because, how do you know, like you might want that now, but if you're under a whole lot of, if you're sedated and under medication, you might change your mind. So are you open, how far do you want me to shoot? How close? Conversations around the types of images I'm going to take. It becomes the work becomes very collaborative. And once you go through the first few sessions, I'm usually with people for like a year, like it's long form work. We get to know each other, and we establish a rhythm, and we establish trust. But it takes a while. You don't just have trust right off the bat. So yeah, so that's part of that process, the trauma informed work, and really having people decide how they want to be represented, how they want to be seen, what images do we use, what images are we not using, and having those very transparent conversations. And then also having the story, like with theater specifically, you can change your story. If you remember something, if you're working with people with trauma, sometimes the stories change. Like memories are recalled, memories are things are brought up. You can change your story. I just did a piece with refugees in the US, and we had it was a theater piece, and right up until the show, which was 2 weeks ago, we made it very clear to the participants, because they were telling their stories, that first of all, you don't have to share your story. If you don't want to, you do not, like, this is, you don't have to go on stage, and you can change your story. You can add, you can subtract, you can do it in your native language. So really giving people that, giving people those options, which I know is hard with film, because film is, when you film, I mean, you can't, can it change? Like those are some of those questions, I think, that we play around with, and by merging the different nonfiction genres.
Is that why you are at the moment playing more in that live performance space and photojournalism space than in film, because it gives you that flexibility based on the relationships?
I mean, honestly, it's just where I'm getting work right now. There's like, we have films in progress. It's just like where I'm getting immediate work right now has been in live theater and in photography. So I'm just kind of running with the work at the moment. But no, I mean, again, I'm open to, we decide what is the medium for this story.
Right. Does that resonate with you, Daniel and Emily, this idea of being in relationship with the subject of your work?
I mean, totally. I've done work for the films for the ALS Foundation, and done a few of them, and every time it's the most difficult situation, where you're filming someone who knows that they're dying, that they're terminal, and that they only have a short time to live, and their consent is paramount. It requires such a sensitivity to film, to create a relationship where you can feel like you're helping tell their story in a way that represents them, but also is going to have a greater benefit for society, in that people will know their story and feel compelled to help donate to research and help find a cause for this terrible illness. So going into every one of those situations, it's like we have to show up and not have a camera for a moment, you know, just be people in a room relating to each other without the camera infringing on that for a moment, at least. And the longer you can do that, the better the results generally have been, where you're talking as people, not as filmmaker to subject. That's can almost be a luxury sometimes in terms of documentary filmmaking, where there's other situations on other projects where you don't have that time, and you especially if it's somewhere far away where you're trying to tell someone's story, but the limitations of the budget and the schedule can be a real challenge with that. So sometimes the mechanisms of the medium, of the fact that you have to show up there with a crew with a camera, can make it very difficult to tell someone's story in a way that's respectful, and gives them a chance to consent or change their story in the way that you're talking about, Ash, or decide that they, you know, they're not sure about this anymore and they need to go. So that is a challenge, definitely, sometimes.
And that, I see you nodding, Emily. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, the question of consent is one that I feel like we're going to be debating and can debate like forever and ever. I think the thing that we as filmmakers sometimes lose sight of is that we are seeing what we're like, when we film, we're looking through the lens and we're seeing what the world is potentially going to see, but our participants are seeing us and no one else is seeing us usually. And so it's a human relationship at the very basis. And there's been a long-term debate about, you know, the journalistic ethics and then the like moral ethics. Journalistically, you know, if you're approaching it as a journalist, you know, you're supposed to be objective and, you know, kind of a blank slate. And there are definitely benefits to that, but with some of these more intimate kinds of topics, like the two that Danny and Ash are talking about, I mean, these are people, you're documenting the last moments of these people's lives. And so how can you not have empathy and have that human relationship? I mean, it's impossible. And it's also like, I think, deeply critical, because what we're trying to do, again, is to step into other people's shoes. And you need to be able to be a person first, in those situations.
You said a really important, you boiled this dynamic that we're talking about down to being about consent. And I think that that's really important to highlight, that so far we have talked about being in relationship with people, your subjects, exciting empathy from your audience to the subject, experiencing that empathy yourself, your intentionality, and that the thing that stands sort of at the crossroads of all of those things is about consent and the way that's negotiated back and forth. Because the thing you can't get away from is that it's a power dynamic, right? You're the one with the camera. As you say, the camera is capturing them, all of them. You decide what is seen and what isn't seen, and none of you is seen. And so it's this kind of omniscient position to be in. No matter how well intentioned you are, that is a steep power dynamic to negotiate. And perhaps that is why we are kind of collectively having the reaction to the sort of lower forms of this work that we're talking about, because there is a kind of a tingle that I think is very intentionally sort of tickled around lack of consent, that we're seeing something of people that we're not supposed to be seeing, that we're seeing them, that they're trying very hard to portray themselves, but in a way that's very sort of pathetically transparent, and we can see them, and that's why we're attracted to that kind of content. And it sort of it kind of massages that nerve for us. Do you agree with that?
And I want to add the thing that I think that's really scary about that, that again we're seeing in the hyper extremes, is that often we as the filmmakers are the ones that are getting that consent and that are keeping that dialogue going, but we often do not actually have final say in how the material exists in the world.
Mm.
And so again, like I said, I straddle between commissioned long form and indie long form. And I am getting more uncomfortable with some of the jobs that I'm considering taking because they're going to expect me to ask of others very invasive, and documentary form, and at its basis it is invasive. But when you were doing that without being able to back up what you're saying, it's hard. It's really, really hard. Um, and I think that's another reason that we're having this conversation about truth and the future and like, all of it, because it's all interconnected. But it's also very scary from like all sides to know that that is what's happening.
Mm.
Yeah, and I feel like that is like being taken advantage of by those people that would, instead of having to have the dialogue with the subject themselves, whatever platform it is using you as an intermediate so that you can take the fall if things don't turn out the way that your subjects thought that they might have, um, and is problematic, of course, to put you in that situation.
Mm. So
And it's pretty common too. I mean, like, how many filmmakers are getting Final Cut when they go to the streaming platforms?
so you're saying that the subjects are being exploited, but that it's a domino effect, and the filmmakers also being exploited within that ecosystem of that streaming documentary specifically on those platforms because of not having final say in how things go.
I don't know if I'd say exploited, because I think many filmmakers go into it knowing that that's the situation at hand. But I think because of the struggle that is filmmaking, that filmmakers may feel they have no choice.
Yeah, that's the real thing of like, if it's not going to make it to the platform if you don't take off all these notes or requests from the studio or the streamer, like,
Mm.
it's just putting us in a terrible position as filmmakers. You're just a middleman.
And your
That
storytelling is potentially, again, going to the question of, is it truth? Is it fact? I mean, again, streamers want clicks. And so they're going to go for the lowest common denominator of the version of the story, no matter how the participants may feel about how they're being portrayed. And if they've already signed that agreement and you've already given the footage to whomever, it's out of your hands. There's really very little that anybody can do at that point. And that, Ash mentioned, regular consent, and that's something that we are seeing in the independent space, happening more so than it did even 5 years ago. But streamers don't do that.
And I think there has to be a real like mention of in our discussion here the fact that like streamers are just like a shell company for tech and Wall Street. Um, Ultimately, that there are engineers who are just looking at algorithms, what gets the most eyeballs, and attacks our attention deficit economy of trying to get eyeballs all the time, and Wall Street, which is only looking to maximize profits for shareholders, which is also maximizing attention from an audience, which maximizes profits for shareholders. So there's a larger organism that's behind all this too, which is really. Go ahead, Emily. Sorry.
Well, and I just want to add, not to like be super literal, but like to Danny's point, I think a really good example of the extremes of this is Amazon is obviously a huge streamer. They are spending, what is it, $40 million on a Melania Trump doc series. She's the first lady of the United States. Her husband is the president of the United States. They're getting $40 million to make some sort of series that's a documentary. We have no idea what is going to be the truth of that, but it's going to be presented as truth.
Well, isn't this a whole emerging subgenre now too of brand building, image making through celebrity
Yep.
documentary?
And often they are executive producers.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, under capitalism, I don't know if it will. I mean, I think about this with theater, with photography. It's always, there's always going to be exploitation, right? Because it's the system that we're working in. You know, and we try to do. You try to do your best as an artist to mitigate that and to create. You know, if just for the subject, you know, if just for them this has been a really empowering and impactful and you know, their truth is told, then that's, you know, that's worthwhile and that's fulfilling and meaningful. But you know, under the economy that we have and capitalism and the systems that are in place, I mean, it's always going to go to, I hate to be that person, but it feels like it will always go to those places of exploitation.
Yeah, I mean, how can you speak truth to power when
Yeah, exactly.
when the power is your funder?
Exactly. I think about that. Like I was thinking about that earlier in the conversation. It's like when we first started, you know, so much of this work, so much of the work I do, I mean, it's funded, it's, you know, funded by either, you know, private donors or you know, grants, or, and if they don't like, I mean, I've worked in nonprofit, and you know, to the earlier, to Joseph's question earlier about like who you know, determining something, I don't know, I've worked in nonprofit, and a lot of the work gets determined by where the funding is, and the story gets kind of cut out by who's funding it, and the story that's not told is also determined by who's funding it. So I mean, I think that kind of answers it circles back to Joseph's punk rock question, right? Like the you know, who is this for in the end, and audience versus you know, the artist. It's you know, so much of it, you know, when you try to avoid that, you try to create your own work, you try to you try so hard to go around that, but ultimately you do end up in that ecosystem where you know, it's being determined by the funders. And if we could,
Sure,
you know, try to find how do we break out of that.
You have all been extremely comprehensive and articulate in talking about the systems that the work lives within and the way you individually and collectively interact with those systems. The thing that, and that feels like a very contemporary struggle. The thing that feels new to me, the thing that feels dangerous to me, particularly about nonfiction forms within this exploitative system, is going back to what Emily said about consent, right? That it seems to me that the lack of consent, or the implied lack of consent, or the sort of gotcha moment of a lot of the way that these things are constructed feeds into the algorithm and the doom scrolling, and you know, they can be sort of addictive of watching one after the other, and it almost begins to feel to me like a system of education teaching people the consent is not important, or that, you know, that dominance is more important, that your dominance as a viewer, that you getting one over on the people that you're watching is the important dynamic here. Um,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
mean,
people will celebrate, you know, oh, we love to see it. We love the messiness. We love this. We love that. Whether it's someone who wore a dress that people thinks is ugly, or has a, you know, messy personal life, or even is discovered to be abusive or whatever, that in and of itself becomes a story, not always because people are interested in dresses or because people are, in a social justice sense, against abuse in relationships or whatever, but for entertainment value in and of itself, that's how it's packaged. And that is feels new to me based on what you're talking about, the environmental, sort of the media environment that we're in now, and that feels really dangerous to me. I'm sorry, Emily, you wanted to say something?
well, yeah, no, I was just thinking, I mean, it kind of goes to the point of like, if it wasn't documented, did it really happen? And I think you're right. I think we are, and this goes back to audience, um, valuing the audience maybe over the participants. Um,
Mm.
and I unfortunately think that that might be something that you're right is getting more familiar within society, but I think we've actually been doing that for a very long time.
I think of the 20, or I don't mean to cut you off. I think of the 24-hour news cycle, right? Like cable television. And this was come about in like the 90s. So it hasn't been that long, but it's just this, and that completely changed the journalism landscape and that ecosystem because it's become about entertainment, right? How do we keep everything's breaking news, breaking news, breaking news? Because how do you keep people tuned in all the time? That's how they make their money. They have to have that 24-hour cycle. Before that, you know, everybody saw kind of the same news at 6 p.m. You got the local news, you have the world news, right? You know, and that's how it was. But then the cable news cycles came in and flipped all of that. And I think now we're seeing kind of the end of the cable news cycles and people going to social media and going to these going to social media, but with that same idea and that same need for like that immediate, you know, that instant gratification. I want that breaking news. I want that, that dopamine kick.
Yeah, this is where influencers as documentarians becomes really murky to me, um, uh, because of that um, monetary imperative to get people to continue to watch, to click over to the next video. And so, you know, for me, in terms of my own consumption, I get most of my news from social media now, not from legacy media, unapologetically, because I feel like the quote unquote citizen journalists, I'm getting actual truth, actual facts in this moment, around the things that are the most important to me. But I am really cautious about getting that from influencers who are building brands based on the issues that are important to me. Why are you in this? You know, if I feel like someone is getting a little too clickbaity, I actually give them a rest. So it has maybe the opposite effect on me. Um, this has been a really rich conversation, and I feel like I could talk to you guys about this for the next 45 minutes, but that's perhaps not practical. So I'd like to bring this to a close. Um, uh, your perspectives have all been as interesting as I thought they would be, and the way that your work speaks to each other has been as interesting as I thought that it was, and so as I thought it would be, and so I'm really happy with how this has progressed. It's given me a lot to think about. I didn't think, you know, starting with the questions that that I asked, I didn't think we were going to get answers necessarily, but what my goal was for this conversation was to really describe the environment that we are living through, particularly around nonfiction, factual, fact-based media, documentary in particular. Um, uh, and you have really helped me to do that. I have so much to think about that I want to follow up with all of you to talk about. But before we come to a close, I want to say, is there anything that hasn't been said that needs to be said about anything, not just what we've been talking about most recently?
I mean, I would say that it both speaks to the power of documentary, and just the nature of the human condition, that like there are so many people that are trying to co-opt documentary as a medium, as a form, as like so many of those influencers are trying to become documentarians because they understand the legitimacy, the authenticity that it provides. Like that there's like the Dinesh D'Souza's of the world too that are using it in a way that's just a propaganda spout, and calling it a documentary is a way to like Trojan horse their own ideas into our public consciousness. So in some ways, documentary itself has grown more power, and this is almost like just an offshoot of that, of what I would say.
I have two very short things. Media literacy is extremely important. So if you do not know what that means, you should Google it and make sure that you are thinking about media literacy at all times. And if you haven't, please protect public media and go to the petition and sign it, because our public media system is literally being threatened this week. And it's gonna hurt society if we see public media disappear in the way that it exists now.
Second
Well said.
that.
Yeah.
Well said.
Do you think that they're, not to open up a new thing as we're ending, but do you think that that attack on what has traditionally been the platform for documentarians, do you think that that is intentional in this moment?
Absolutely.
To handicap the people who are the most well versed with truth versus fact?
I mean, it's part of the fascist playbook, right? Go after the journalists, go after the educators, go after the universities, go after the artists, go after the documentarians. It's all, I mean, it's nothing new historically. You can track that. It's absolutely intentional.
That is a sad place to end, but I'm afraid that is where we are. And so I'm laughing because it's like laugh or cry, baby. This is where we are. I think it's important to acknowledge what's real, always, particularly in the context of this conversation. And so, thank you, Emily, for reminding us of that right at the end. Absolutely 100% co-sign to everyone watching to do whatever you can to protect public media. And you're reminding me that I'll make an announcement too at our screenings for the rest of the festival to do exactly that. Thank you again for your participation. This has been a wonderful conversation. I would invite you all and also everyone watching to stick with us for the rest of the festival. The rest of the programming is chef's kiss. It's fantastic. We are an award-winning international film festival, and just this year we're named the premier film festival of Brooklyn, and we agree. So come and don't take us at our word. Come and check us out, including the documentary block, and actually it's an entire evening of documentary, shorts, and a feature running back to back that Daniel is going to be there. So you can see the famous Daniel in person. Remind me the day that's happening. Daniel, remind me when that's happening.
On Monday, and I think that the blocks of films speak to this conversation a lot. Like I was able to pick a group of films that really do speak truth to power, and also give you a window into different people's lives in a way that's really fascinating too.
Terrific. I'll see you there. Thank you so much for all your help tonight, folks.